This series is presented in partnership with the Black Magic Woman podcast, Cairns Indigenous Art Fair, and Bummer Bibber Media, 98.7 FM.
Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bales.
I'd like to begin by following proper protocol and acknowledge the Kabi peoples whose land where this vodcast or podcast is being recorded. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We have never ceded our sovereignty as First Nations peoples living in this country, now known as Australia. And in case you don't know where Kabi country is, we're at Coolum Beach and it's the Sunshine Coast in beautiful Queensland. We're here to talk about a really exciting partnership. This is a special series promoting Cairns Indigenous Art Fair. CIAF is committed to strengthening and celebrating culture, creating professional development opportunities for artists and cultural exchange between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and visitors. CIAF is focused on offering an ethical art marketplace, attracting national and international collectors and curators, commissioning new work and providing pathways for emerging visual and performance artists. It's in Cairns, in Queensland, Australia, every single year. And our first guest to kick off this partnership is Francois Lane. And I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, Francois, can you please introduce yourself, tell us who your mob is, a little bit about yourself, where you grew up?
Love to. Thank you for having me. I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land I run my business and I live, and that's the Indij people. It's a beautiful country here. I'm located at the base of Jarragan, which is commonly known as Walsh's Pyramid in Gordon Vale. It's a magical country where it's just freshwater creeks and beautiful rainforest, and it's a really lovely area of Cairns. So I am a Kaurareg and Meriam woman. A lot of people are familiar with the Meriam people. The Meriam people are on the side of my grandmother's side, and on my grandfather's side, my maternal grandfather's side, are the Kaurareg people, and they're the Aboriginal people of that Torres Strait NPA area. So I'm also well and truly blended. My dad is Australian but Irish descent, so I don't want to leave that out. And I have been living in Cairns for some 17 years and practicing as an interior designer for some 20 years. I'm an artist at heart, and I'm coming back to my roots these days, making that decision to do what I really love to do, which is creating art and working in that art space. I'm also a mother of 3 adult children now, and I have 2 grandchildren also. So I have a lovely, beautiful family. They inspire me with my work. It's amazing to see how my love for country and my love for our culture carries through the next generation. It's a lovely thing to see when your kids, when they want to ground themselves again, they're heading out, not to their country, but to the country of those where we live. So it's really lovely to see that continuing, and they have that regeneration on country.
Francois, can you share, some of the listeners that listen to this podcast are outside of Australia, and I would also say that in terms of in terms of the work that I do around cultural capability, and it's about sharing our 2 cultures. Not that I do the Torres Strait Islander section, we leave that to our Bala Henry Nona, who does an amazing job of sharing that. But for people that don't know about the Torres Straits, can you share with us where the Torres Strait Islands are and even what it's like? Did you grow up in the Torres Strait or were you born off country?
Yeah, sure. So the Torres Strait Islands are at the very top of Cape York Peninsula. So when you have that point in Queensland, it's the islands off the very tip, and it's between the tip of Australia and Papua New Guinea. And the islands extend across that section. There's eastern and there's western islands. And then as you come down closer to the tip of Cape York, that's where you come into the Kaurareg country, which is the Aboriginal seafaring group of that region. And that I have lineage into that group. So I didn't grow up in the Straits. I grew up on the mainland. I think of myself as like a mainland islander. So I grew up in Brisbane, in the southeast of Queensland. I went to school there. I went to university there. I ended up getting married there and having our first child, my husband and my first child there. In saying that, I went back to the Torres Strait in my later teenage years quite regularly. My parents moved back to the Straits when I was 19. And so it was really wonderful. I could go back and on my holidays and stay up there on a very regular basis. So I was going up a few times a year.
I would say in terms of Australians, most people are familiar with Aboriginal culture. They know the Aboriginal flag. But when we talk about the Torres Strait Islander people have never heard about the Torres Strait Islander people. And the Torres Strait Islander culture is very different to the Aboriginal people and culture. So the Kaurareg people, which is like a nation, and it's in the Torres Strait, they are different to the Torres Strait Islander people. There's probably a lot of people that have intermarried as well. And would you say that you might be a product of that, having both of those bloodlines?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So even my mum, her parents, both of her parents are half full-blooded Islander and half Filipino. So there's even a mix in there. And in the Torres Strait, there were Malay people who came down and made Thursday Island their home, and also Japanese people. So this is around pearl diving and also the beach demur. So you have other nations which have intermarried with Islander people, and even Chinese too.
I think it's so important that as a Torres Strait Islander woman, and also as an Aboriginal woman, that people that are listening or watching this podcast might be inspired to look at their next holiday, perhaps coming to the Torres Strait and doing one of those cultural experiences. I've never been myself, but the amount of photos, Uncle Benny Mills lives literally down the road from me. And Uncle Benny's been holidaying with his family. So big shout out to Uncle Benny and Auntie Yvonne. So Patty and Alyssa are there in the Torres Strait, and they just celebrated the 30th anniversary of Mabo Day in the Torres Strait. So big shout out. And I just thought that maybe, for people that haven't, if you're going to go to CIAF, if you're going to venture up to Cairns for this amazing festival, maybe look at extending your stay and seeing what else can you do, because money's going back into Indigenous communities, and that's what's important. You're supporting Indigenous peoples when you're investing in Indigenous businesses, and an Indigenous business is 100 times more likely to employ an Indigenous person. We actually make up 0.06% of the 2 million businesses in Australia. That's the Indigenous business statistics. And I thought it would be a good leadway into how did you start your business, and then we might actually talk about CIAF. So you've got a company that I saw with your husband that you started quite some time ago. Can you share with us just your journey? How did you know you wanted to be in business? How did you get to that point?
Well, the dreaming began back in 1994. So Andrew and I were both working for Queensland Government in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander housing unit. and we were in the design section of that unit. So we came in, I was fresh out of university after studying a Bachelor of Built Environment, majoring in interior design at QUT. And Andrew was in his final year of architecture at UQ. So we met in the design office, and about 6 months later, a romance started. And it was funny. I saw this man come in when I started there, and I wasn't too fond of architects. I mean, met some nice ones, but I found them to be quite egotistical. Mm-hmm. And anyhow, I saw this student architect come into the office, and I'd heard about him, and he was wearing his Maroons stubbies for the Queensland team. They won, by the way.
Wrong colour.
So he'd picked that winning side, and it was something that I'd noticed when he walked into the office. So he was this 6 foot strapping, lovely Aboriginal man. And anyhow, I just saw the back of him, and I looked down the legs and I saw those ankles, and I went, yeah.
He's a black fella.
Yeah, he's a black fella.
Yep. I know all about it. Yep.
And so from my countrymen, you have a lot of that solid leg made for walking through mangrove is what I think of, walking through the mud and getting crab and very strong legs.
Yep.
So that was just a funny thing. Anyhow, so Andrew he's got quite a lot of knowledge around designing for Indigenous housing, and he also understood from way back, because it's part of our way. We know that Aboriginal cultures and nations in Australia are diverse. We're not the same from nation to nation. There are nuances between clans. So we were already ahead of the game back in the 90s, knowing that there were differences. And we don't assume that Aboriginal nations from the southern areas of Australia are going to have the same requirements in housing as a mob from Brisbane or mob from up in the Cape or mob in Central Australia. So it was an area of practice that we had a heart for. My grandmother at that time, when I started working in the Aboriginal design unit, she still had a what do you call it, a thunderbox that she went to for her toilet. She didn't even have a flushing toilet. This was up in the Torres Strait on Kerriri Island, which is just a stone's throw from Thursday Island. So this is the mid-90s, and unfortunately, I think that the housing hasn't developed enough during that time. We just go round and round and round in circles. We might not have thunderboxes for toilets that people are having to empty with the outgoing tide. But unfortunately, we're still not designing to suit the cultural needs of our mob. Mm. So that's what got me into Aboriginal housing in the first place. So as an interior designer, I came into the section. I was very new out of uni. I couldn't practice initially in an architecture firm, partly because I was really uninspired, I guess, by the direction of the work. I wanted to do work that would bring change to people. So working in the Aboriginal design unit was a really good thing for me at that time. So I came in to put together a booklet of finishes that would be used throughout the whole of Queensland for all of the social housing coming out of that unit. So there was some 30 different housing designs in that unit. So what I did was approach it from the perspective of what are the different countries in Queensland? What do artists from that country see as special of that country? And then I started to put together colour palettes and finishes palettes within, and of course this is limited because we are talking social housing, that referenced the country in which it would in which this colour scheme would go. And so that's how I broke it up. And that was a really new approach. So this is connecting with country back when it wasn't even a term being used in the design profession. Andrew and I worked on a extension to a house on Dwan Island up in the Torres Strait. And Dwan Island is in very close proximity to Papua New Guinea. You can see Papua New Guinea from that island. So we worked on this housing extension and a new house design where we had 2 pavilions and we joined them with a shared undercover multi-purpose space. So people could dine in that area, they could relax and yarn together, and there were stairs coming off that so people could sit on the stairs and yarn too, but also have cover. So when we had that torrential downpour that you get in the tropics up in the Torres Strait, they would be covered and have shelter, but also be outdoors and being able to look out, see what's going on, see who's coming to visit. And so that was something we worked on together, and we looked at how we could make that design more suitable for the islanders. So that was where I gave input into that and just pushed for more of a relationship between the kitchen and that outdoor space. We made changes whilst we were in the design unit. There were 2 other Aboriginal draftsmen who came in and worked in the design office. We all recognised that we needed to have like an outdoor kitchen set up for community so that people could, when they catch their fish, they can go and cut it up, or they catch kangaroo, they can cut it up and do that outdoors and do that cleaning up where the remains and that being washed down the drain wasn't going to end up blocking a sewage system. So we did things to allow for that. Significant changes, but very small in the cog of the government machine, but we brought change, and that was a really good thing. The other thing in that unit, there was like 80% Indigenous employment in that design section. You can imagine how that would have changed the way we looked at the designs going out to community.
I wonder if our mob actually knew of the, like the behind the scenes work to then go into, these buildings or houses that they're living in, that there was actually like Indigenous design principles, you could say, that were part of that whole process. So that's pretty deadly in terms of social housing, having qualified Indigenous people leading the way in that piece of work and not non-Indigenous people trying to do the best that they can with the limited knowledge and experience, I would say, for architects and draftsmen. Is there a lot of architects that are Indigenous? Do you know? Is there like a... Today, yeah?
Yes, there are. And it's a growing number. So I think with the women, there must be 30 and growing.
And do you
always
think,
growing.
In terms of in Queensland, will it be QUT or UQ? Are they the universities that you're finding a lot of our mob are going to?
In Queensland, yes. The Griffith University also have a interior design course that they offer. But yes, in Queensland, it's UQ and QUT that offer architecture and built environment at QUT, which architecture falls under, I think.
I was just...
it may have changed since I was there. I'm sure it has.
I was just saying, Francois, there are a lot of First Nations people that listen to this podcast now, watching the vodcast, and might be thinking, they probably didn't think it's architecture or interior designing that they want to do. But if they are thinking of, it could be a new career path, or if you're fresh out of school and you're looking still for a career, seek out the universities. There is so much in terms of the opportunities for our mob to participate in higher education. So where you are today, you've got a company. Is it Indij Design?
Indij Design. Yeah, Indij Architecture and Design. So my husband and I, the dream started when we were back when we were working together. So this was after we ended up getting married, and we're talking about, gosh, it'd be great to, in the future, have our own practice. So we eventually started our own practice in 2011. And we're a small business. It's just Andrew and I, and we bring in a contracted architect on larger projects. So it's just a small practice. We have been working with different levels of government and also non-government organisations, and we don't so much do any housing. It's more the commercial, health. We've done some education, and also we're very good at engagement. So that's something that
it's
we've done quite a bit of work in. Yeah,
it is a value add when you're dealing with Indigenous people, not just consultants. I can be honest with you, Francois, I've been brought in as a cultural advisor on a few big architecture projects and bids. Richard Kirk is an architect from Brisbane who's been working with the Murray School on our big master plan. There's another, you know Richard? Well, there you go, big shout out to you, Richard. There's a few other architects. There's Richard Green in Victoria, and another Indigenous guy, and they were part of drafting up that Indigenous design principles, which is pretty deadly when I looked at it. And I thought this is really good for that industry to be able to look at and learn from us and see how can we actually, like you said, to connect to country is one thing. And I think non-Indigenous Australians are looking for that opportunity to connect to the land that they call home. They can do so through the work that they do. But tell me about CIAF. Right. How did you get involved with CIAF? I've never been to the festival, and I know that it goes 6th to the 10th of July. Mm-hmm. It's in Cairns. Can you share with us how you got involved with the festival?
Yeah, so I've been involved in the festival for since 2016. So that's participating in the art market. And then in 2021, I went to Janina Harding, the artistic director, and proposed a exhibition for CIAF called Where's Your Permit? So that was the first time I came into a curatorial role with CIAF. Prior to that, I had been involved in symposiums, in recorded conversations. Indij Design had like I said, an art market store for consecutive years. I had also 1 year collaborated with the local designer to put in a collection in the fashion and performance show also. So I've been involved in different ways and just love the fair. It is so unique to have a fair like CIAF in Australia, because you get that combination of Torres Strait Islander art and culture mixing with Aboriginal art and culture. It's Queensland wide, but I don't think there is any other fair in Australia that combines the two. So both Indigenous cultures are celebrated.
So for me, in terms of I've never been to the fair before, what's some of the things that I could do there?
You have the big art fair, firstly, that you can go and enjoy. So that's made up of independent artists from throughout Queensland. There's community art centres and galleries. There's also a symposium that runs on one of the days, and that's where you have curated conversations and presentations around arts and creative practice for those, deep thinkers. And there's other events happening in the evening. There's a comedy show one evening. There's the fashion story exhibition. So there's satellite events happening as well as the main fair at the Cairns Convention Centre. So it's good to check out the program. There's also dancing and performance happening throughout the day from the different nations. And there's nothing quite like standing near where dancing is happening and feeling the vibration of the stamping feet. There's nothing like it. You have to be there to experience it. It's no good looking at a screen. You need to be there.
Of course. So tell us about your role as are you the co-curator of the fashion story exhibition?
That's right. I'm the co-curator of the Fashion Story exhibition. And this I'm co-curating with Janina Harding. We enjoyed working together so much last year on the Where's Your Permit exhibition, which you might want to talk about later, that we decided to do this again. So with this exhibition, we're giving that opportunity again to look at the incredible design collections from the designers that put their work in the 2020 and 2021 fashion and performance shows. There were incredible digital footage taken of those performances where the curators, Simone Arnold and Bernie Singleton, really looked at how they could present the design collections honouring the country that the designers were from, and connecting that back to country. So some of the footage is like I think of Wujal Wujal. They've filmed that with fresh water, like beside a creek, and you have a focus on these beautiful silk caftans and robes that were printed by the artists at Wujal Wujal Art Centre. You focus on that, and then the camera zooms out to an overhead shot to show country and to show their inspiration, which is that freshwater river and rainforest. You see it.
Wow.
It's right, it's right together. So that was an opportunity that, a COVID brought that we hadn't had before, was this, okay, this is the country of the designers. This is their inspiration. So it was connecting the two. The other thing that Fashion Story is doing is honouring regional Indigenous fashion textile show. And this is a grassroots community initiative that began in 2012, and it was the very first Indigenous fashion show in the region. Because it was grassroots, they did this without funding. So everyone volunteered their time and made just a magical fashion show. And out of this fashion show has come some of the biggest names in Australia, Indigenous fashion.
Wow.
But you just don't hear of them because they're so humble.
Of course, of course. So there's obviously this podcast where we can talk them up, and we will put some in the show notes in terms of some of the other designers that people can see, and even a link to the program so people can start looking, because I know you need to book tickets to some of these events, and this is an international arts fair. People from all around the world come to Cairns for this fair. Is it every year or is it every second year?
It's every year.
It's every year. I just want to say there's a dress that you're working on, an A-line dress. Can you tell us a little bit about that dress?
Yes, I can. So I've designed a dress which has been inspired by the island dress. So that's the one that if you Google Torres Strait Islander ladies around cultural celebrations, you'll see that they wear these flowery, colourfully printed dresses that are quite loose, so you can kai up lots of food and be very comfortable.
That's the main thing.
And nice and cool when it's hot. So I've designed a dress which is inspired by that, but I've created more simple lines than what's on that dress. And I am designing a special range of textiles that go with that dress alone. So that's what I've been doing on the side of everything else.
Well, how can people, like in terms of, is your stuff for sale? Do you have
all
Yep.
Yes, my textiles are available for sale.
Yep.
You can view them on francoislaneart.com, and then that you will see in there a section under surface pattern art. And all of these can be applied to textile. I've had some of these works licensed to go on cladding on buildings. In fact, one of my textile designs was adapted. I worked with architects locally to adapt it to go onto a building in the Torres Strait. So that was really lovely. Family go by and go, that's Franny's artwork on that building. So architects specify my work, the textiles. I should say that one of my textile designs was nominated last year as a finalist in the National Indigenous Fashion Awards. And I've also, I mean, this is like big noting, which is not what we do.
Good.
No,
I love this. Tell me more.
I did an international collaboration with Emily Miller-Chip, a Scottish designer, and we created these backpacks called Tropical Punk backpacks. And they were a finalist, a top 4 in the Edinburgh Creative Awards. So they're really funky backpacks, and they're on the Francois Lane art website when you look under projects. And I'm going to Helsinki in September to December with a artist residency with the Helsinki International Arts Program. So I was one of 2 selected from Australia to go on this residency. So it's really nice to have that recognition that your artwork is of that standard, and that's great. The other thing was that with the Where's Your Permit exhibition, which I didn't say much about because that was last year, we did an exhibition that connected the common and shared experiences that broader Australia had with living with restrictions on movement to living under the Protectionist Act in Queensland. So we started off with this common base, and from there added to it. So it was a platform of truth-telling through visual storytelling. And we also had up the Act with all of the rules about what you couldn't do being Aboriginal and Islander. So it was a real bringing home that this wasn't the only restriction, and how would it be that this is based on a separatist policy. So the thing that separated this from other exhibitions is that the venue design was Indigenised. So being a designer, I brought my argument to the curator of the Tanks Arts Centre. So these are this council-run arts centre. And I said, we are going off the grid that you usually use, because this exhibition is all about owning what's ours to own. And what's ours to own is changing up this layout internally so that it meets our needs, so it makes our mob feel safe to enter. So that's what we're going to do with this. And he was like, because they never go off grid. And
well, they're not used to
brilliant.
being challenged as well, see. A lot of our mob are meant to just be thankful and appreciative, right, for the fact that there's a door open, and you may have a seat at the table, and you should be thankful.
Yes. Everyone just embraced it. So it was like this cross-cultural learning environment where the Tanks Art Centre staff learnt about respect and respect for material culture, and that recognition of sometimes women can't touch rainforest swords, or they don't want to touch it because that's men's business. So they saw that there was this, oh no, you are so-and-so to do that because I'm a woman and I don't want to touch that. So there's just like this, there was beautiful learnings going on through that process.
Lovely. Well, I can't wait to see myself, and hopefully it does tour so that more Australians can learn about, the history, the culture, And also, like I said, celebrating it as well, not just waiting to NAIDOC Week or National Reconciliation Week, but actually celebrating every other day. Otherwise, get to the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair from the 6th to the 10th of July this year, 2022, just in case you're listening to this podcast later on in the year. It's happening here in Queensland, in this beautiful country known as Australia, and it's a unique opportunity to, I guess, immerse yourselves in the two Indigenous cultures in this country. So on that note, Francois, I just want to take the time to say thank you for being the first guest as part of the CIAF series, and just thank you for giving up some time to share with us a little bit about your journey and what you do. And I'm really excited to jump on your website and have a look at some of your textiles. So thank you so much for jumping on and having a yarn today.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to talk with you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. I'm not too sure if that's the first interior designer / architect that I have had on the podcast, but definitely the first conversation I've had around textiles. So Francois is an artist and textile designer that helps lovers of standout textiles and pattern by creating unique textiles inspired by stories of connection to country. Her goal is that her textiles will bring joy to your home and put a delightful spring in your step when you wear them. In 2013, Francois developed artworks inspired by her connection to the Torres Strait Islands and exploration of visually storytelling. Her artworks have been adapted into repeat patterns and specified for upholstery and applied art to architectural design, structural screens. She has also designed fashion accessories integrating design elements of the textile art. Jump on her website. You can have a look under the Francois Lane art.com or jump on indijdesign.com.au.
This series is presented in partnership with the Black Magic Woman podcast, Cairns Indigenous Art Fair, and Bummer Bibra Media, 98.7 FM. The Cairns Indigenous Art Fair, 6th to the 10th of July in Cairns. For tickets or for more information on what's on, head to ciaf.com.au. That's ciaf.com.au.
Don't forget to follow Black Magic Woman podcast on all social media platforms. To keep up to date with the latest episodes and news, head to blackmagicwoman.com.au. You can rate and review the podcast on iTunes, and please feel free to share the podcast with your family and friends.